We are back with another episode of ranking corporate rebrands from S tier to D tier. Starting off the G Suite icons, I kind of just did the entire set. There's a lot of nice things about the new icons, especially with the relationship to the logo here. And I think this makes the entire set of icons feel a little bit more cohesive. So when I look to the left here at the older icons, in my eyes, they feel kind of like a bunch of separate icons pulled from like different icon packs online. Some of them have shadows, some of them are completely flat. I think if I look at these individual icons, I like the Google Calendar original look more than the new Google Calendar look, but when I look at them as a set, I think that's more important. I'm just gonna take the G Suite logo and put it in A tier to start us off. Moving into the Popeyes rebrand. So this one surprised me. I don't think I've seen very many Popeyes with the new look. Taking a look at the old Popeyes logo, I think it's very obvious to tell. This to me looks like Microsoft Word graphic design is my passion type of logo. And the new logo, I think, takes a lot of elements that work from the old logo and kind of revives it into just a stronger overall mark. There's not much I would change about it, and I like the inclusion of the new character because I think making the entire brand being represented by the letter P, like you can see in the old logo, doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's not very strong. It doesn't have that same personality you would get from a playful like animal or character, which is why you see those used so often in logos. So I'm going to group this one alongside G Suite. We'll put it in A tier. Up next, we're looking at the Slack rebrand. So you can see here the old one uses that like hashtag symbol. And I think that their decision to get rid of these overlapping colors is the correct decision, because if we look at something like the Google Workspace icons and how they overlap versus how the Slack logo overlaps, I think the colors in the middle here are very unappealing, and this feels kind of muddled. This as a logo, this hashtag symbol, is maybe a bit too basic as a shape to be used for like a big company. And this, to me, this pinwheel is going to be a lot more memorable, at least in the long term. The shape itself still feels a little bit unusual to me, but it's definitely an improvement from where it was. So I'm going to put the new Slack rebrand in B tier. Moving into Radio Shack. So this is kind of an older brand. A lot of people said that they thought they went out of business. I thought they went out of business, but I think that this logo feels a bit dated, and the fact that it has a radio in the name already feels very ancient at this point. So I think the decision to modernize the logo in this case, I know a lot of people don't like simplified modern logos, but when you think of just as a business how they can keep going, they're not trying to stand out, they're trying to keep up. Although it isn't exciting, I think it's fine to either put it in C or B. We'll kind of say that it's an in-between logo, but I'm gonna put it in C tier for now. Moving on to the iconic Internet Explorer logo. So in this one, I decided to include like multiple variations of it, starting with, I think the icon people in my kind of age range most recognize it as, and then you can see it get modified to become more and more simplified. I actually really like how they modernized the original logo into this flat icon. This version, not so much. And then the Edge logo. This one is technically not Internet Explorer now, it's Microsoft Edge. Internet Explorer used to be clowned for being like the search engine that nobody wanted to use, so they had to change the name and try to start fresh. It doesn't really stand out to me. I'm personally not going to remember it, so I'm going to put the Edge logo either in D or C tier, but I'm going to say D tier. Looking at the Firefox logo, I thought that the logo to the right here was the new Firefox, but I guess these two are used in tandem with each other. So we have the logo on the right is the Firefox brand. So let me pull this up just to clarify. And this is pretty much how we're supposed to see Firefox. So we have Firefox here, the applications, and then the browser. But I do think if you look at these applications, these almost feel like afterthoughts. And I actually think that the browser is more recognizable and iconic than the main logo, which is a problem. So I guess that's where I'm getting caught up. Visually, I think it's cool. I still don't really understand the use case for these, so I'll put them both together in C tier. Dunkin' Donuts, otherwise I guess officially now known as Dunkin'. So they had a similar issue in their brand where now they're not just selling donuts, they have like an entire collection of products that they sell. This is the reason why Apple decided not to put a computer into their logo, because you remember how computers looked back then. They would have to keep updating the logo to look like their newest model. It doesn't really work. And with that thought in mind, these rebrands, we're seeing people take products out of their logos because it just doesn't work in the long term. They took the elements of the previous things that were the most important, being the word Dunkin' and then the color. I really like that they took in the apostrophe here, the pink color, to incorporate it back into this more simplified mark. If you look at Dunkin's branding and how they package their products, I think this logo works really well in that space. So I'll put Dunkin' in A tier. Talking about Taco Bell, we have the old logo here, the new one, which I think most people would agree with me, feels a little bit more lifeless. I think that the new typeface is more legible, especially at smaller scales, which for a brand is always going to be very important, especially if they want their logo to be seen on the streets from far away. I appreciate that they fixed these shapes here with these curved lines. I don't think that having these swirls is completely necessary, and I think it adds a lot of tension that doesn't need to be there. And when you look at the new logo, just having a single cutout in the negative space feels more balanced, and you can still make out the bell shape. I think the new buildings look a little bit bland, and I think these muted purple colors for fast food, it doesn't feel very exciting. So I think with that aside, the functional issues that they fixed makes it worth putting in B tier. Up next, the Warner Brothers logo. This one, I remember people were in a panic when it was released. To me, I've always seen this new logo as being kind of awkwardly narrow. I think they took the important elements, obviously the shapes of the WB. I think they translated this logo very well. It's definitely not a bad logo by any means. I think a lot of people just panicked at the thought of these two just having such different personalities, but this works. This is very limited. The old logo is very limited in how you can use it just because of the detail, and I think the new one gives more options for it to be used in more unique ways. I do think visually on its own it's weaker, but as a branding element it gives more opportunity. So I'm going to put it in B tier as well. It's not as crazy a change as people think. If you give it some time, I think people will adjust to it. So looking at Dropbox and their rebrand, I think this is similar to the MasterCard logo, which I reviewed a long time ago. It's very, very subtle changes that I think work well. You can see the angle of the flaps is different from the shape of the box, whereas in the new logo, everything is kind of the same isometric square, and I think this makes it feel a little bit more balanced. They also brightened up the blue just to be a little bit more modern, feel less corporate, a little bit less boring. A lot of brands are doing that now. Making the text white and giving that contrast from the mark and the type as opposed to making it all blue is also a nice choice. It being that there have only been improvements with this logo, I think it's safe to say Dropbox, although very underappreciated and very subtle, is an A tier rebrand. So going back to fast food logos, we have the Subway logo here. So we have the old one to the left. I think the new logo fixes a lot of issues with the old one, being that these colors, normally when I think of like fresh food, I don't think of neon as a color palette. I think of more of these earthy muted tones. So I think that was a very important distinction. You don't want your logo to look like it's for a factory. I actually like the shapes of the arrows. The overall shapes I think are more balanced, and I think the colors do what they're supposed to do, and they still feel reminiscent of the old branding. I feel very comfortable putting Subway in A tier. So moving into the Peugeot rebrand, I didn't really think that they solved any of the old issues. So like this is supposed to be a lion. The look of it is very, very awkward. I think the shapes and kind of the random gradients all over the place, like it feels very imbalanced. They changed the logo to keep that lion in there, but the look of it still feels awkward. And I would argue that the new logo, the lion is even harder to read than the old one. I can see the intention here, but it really falls flat in what they're trying to execute on. The thinness of these lines makes it really hard to read as what it is unless you get up really, really close. I don't know if anyone would disagree with me, but I don't think this rebrand did really anything for this brand. I would probably put it in D tier. Up next with the Meta logo, I actually reviewed this by itself in a separate video, but I just wanted to give it its own ranking. I like that they pulled the blue from the old Facebook logo. I like that the shapes of the typography have kind of that roundness that matches this infinity symbol. Obviously the infinity creating the letter M is also a nice little creative quirk. And the main downside to this is really just the name change. And because of that, I feel pretty safe putting it in B tier. The main drawback visually is that it's not very memorable. So we've seen a lot of concepts with the infinity symbol done in the past. Visually, this looks nice, but conceptually, it's very boring. I think that makes sense to put it in B tier, kind of in the middle. Moving into PayPal, I'm a big fan of the new one compared to the old one, especially if we look at the things that they fixed. The softness of the new logo makes it more approachable in my eyes. PayPal, right, they took the P from both of those words and just kind of collided them together. Similar to the MasterCard logo, instead of just having them collide and creating this really tense outline here with the stroke, instead of doing that, they just overlap them and do nice little color change in the center to make it feel like it has depth. Everything just ties together really well. I love the relationship between the logo mark and the logo type. So the change in the A being a little bit more modern, having that softer look, I actually feel pretty comfortable making PayPal the first S tier logo. When I look at this logo, there's no more problems to solve. So looking at the Patreon logo, the old one here, a brand that I did not even know rebranded until recently. There's a lot of tension in the T, the R, and the E here in the negative space. It just feels very crowded. So to me, this typeface is a little bit awkward. It needs some fixing. But I think that the mark actually is very balanced. But when I look at the new one, it is like a completely different brand. They have the rectangle and the circle and the new type, which I agree feels more balanced. I think the typeface is more functional, it's more legible, and I think this works. I do not even think it would be possible for Patreon to make this a memorable logo in the long term. Is it a D tier? Is it C tier? There's not much emotional response when you look at a logo like this. When you look at it, it just feels a little bit too neutral. Let's put it in D tier. I feel uncomfortable putting it next to the Firefox logo, which has personality to it. Do I need to make an outro for this for YouTube? We're fine.